You may recall how our most basic example of a compact set was the family of closed intervals. However, we also showed that this is not a compact set because it's an interval, but specifically because it is closed and bounded. Those are the actually important properties that make it compact. And way back near the beginning of this course, when we were discussing infinities, we saw the surprising result that the closed interval from 0 to 1 was in fact uncountable. The cardinality of this set is in fact the same as the real numbers. It has uncountably many elements. However, once again, this closed interval being uncountable is not because it's an interval, but because of something else, which we're going to see today. Just like a closed interval is a basic example of a compact set, so too is it a basic example of what's called a perfect set. We say that a set P in the reals is perfect if it's closed and contains no isolated points. So every point of a perfect set then is a limit point, meaning of course that there's some sequence in the perfect set converging to each of its points. And of course, every closed interval, excluding the trivial closed interval that has only a single element, every other closed interval is a perfect set. They're closed, and all of their points are limit points. Closed intervals, of course, are a little bit boring. A more interesting example is the Cantor set, which we've previously introduced, link in the description. The Cantor set is also a perfect set, and this is fairly easy to justify. Recall briefly how the Cantor set is constructed. We begin with the closed interval from 0 to 1, and then from this closed interval, we cut out the open middle third from 1/3 to 2/3. And that leaves two sections behind, the closed third at the beginning from 0 to 1/3, and the closed third at the end from 2/3 to 3/3, which of course is 2/3 to 1. The Cantor set is constructed by continuing this process. We cut out the open middle third of this interval and this one. That would then give us 4 intervals in the next step. We'd cut out all of those middle thirds and so on infinitely. Recursively, the Cantor set C can be defined like so. It's the limit of this infinite intersection of sets Cn, where C0 is that closed interval from 0 to 1, and each subsequent Cn can be found by taking the previous Cn minus 1, cutting it into thirds, and unioning the lower thirds with the upper thirds. And of course, to show the Cantor set is perfect, we need to show that it is closed and contains no isolated points. So an arbitrary point from the Cantor set we would need to show is a limit point. Now first, showing that the Cantor set is closed is straightforward. By its very definition, each of these Cn's is a finite union of closed intervals. So each Cn, by its very definition, is closed because each Cn is a finite union of closed intervals. So the Cantor set, by its definition, is an infinite intersection of closed sets. And an infinite intersection of closed sets we know to be closed. Hence, the Cantor set is closed. Next, we need to show that the Cantor set C contains no isolated points. For this proof, we begin by taking an arbitrary element from the Cantor set. Now, the way we're going to construct a sequence that converges to X is to simply understand that if X is in the Cantor set, then certainly it must be in all of the closed intervals that go into the Cantor set's construction. At each step of the Cantor set's construction, by its definition, we're only cutting out open thirds, which means we never take out the endpoints of the closed intervals. Since we know X is in the Cantor set, it must be an element of a closed interval in each step of the Cantor set's construction. And so by taking endpoints from these intervals, we'll be able to get arbitrarily close to this element X. Sketching it out just a little bit more, certainly X is somewhere in that beginning closed interval from 0 to 1. So if we picked one of these endpoints to start our sequence, the furthest away from x we could be is 1 unit, since that's the entire interval width, just 1. At the next step of the Cantor set's construction, we have two closed intervals, 0 to 1/3 and 2/3 to 1. And x certainly has to be in one of these closed intervals. Whichever it is, we could select either of the endpoints to be the next term in our sequence, and the furthest away it could be from x now is 1/3, because that's the width of the interval. This logic continues. X has to be a member of smaller and smaller intervals, and so we get endpoints that get closer and closer to x. Of course, if at any point x is equal to one of the endpoints of the closed interval, we would just select the other endpoint to be in our sequence, because we want to make sure that no term of the sequence is equal to x. That's not allowed. So going back to the written out details, we take that arbitrary element x from the Cantor set. So of course, x is an element of this first iteration, C1, which is the union of those two closed intervals, the lower third and the upper third. Hence, x being in C, which is an intersection that involves C1, means that x must be in this closed interval or in this one, and both of them have widths of 1/3. Thus, we know there exists some number, we'll call it x1, that is in the Cantor set and in this first iteration, C1, which means that it's in this union, so that the distance between x and x1 is less than or equal to 1/3 and greater than 0. We can guarantee the distance is greater than 0 because we have at least two endpoints to choose from. If x1 is in this closed interval, maybe it equals this endpoint. Well, then we can pick this endpoint, so the distance is less than or equal to 1/3 and greater than 0. One more time, I'll specify we know the endpoints of the closed intervals are in the Cantor set because we only ever cut out open thirds. So there's no way those endpoints get cut out in the construction. So continuing this logic, we know that each Cn is the union of n+1 closed intervals that all have a width of 1/3 to the power of n. Just like C1 is the union of two closed intervals that each have widths of 1/3. And then for each Cn, we know that x must be in one of those n+1 closed intervals, and whichever closed interval x belongs to, the endpoints of this interval certainly belong to C, and so we would have some element of our sequence, xn, which is in Cn and is in the Cantor set, and so where certainly the distance between x and this term of our sequence, xn, is greater than 0, because remember, we have at least two endpoints to pick from, so we can guarantee we pick some number that's not x, and this distance is less than or equal to 1/3 to the power of n, because we know that x and xn are coming from one of those closed intervals which have a width of 1/3 to the power of n. In this way, we construct a sequence xn where none of its terms are equal to x, all of its terms belong to the Cantor set, and it gets arbitrarily close to x. Thus, x, this arbitrary element of the Cantor set, is not isolated. So the Cantor set is closed, has no isolated points, and hence, by definition, is a perfect set. Now, we began this discussion talking about uncountability, and indeed, perfect sets are uncountable. So closed intervals, which we know to be uncountable when they're not trivial, and the Cantor set, which we also have previously argued is uncountable, well, of course all these things are uncountable because they're perfect sets. This is a quality of sets that are closed and have no isolated points, and that's what we're going to prove next. So we're proving this theorem: a non-empty perfect set is in fact uncountable. The flow of this proof will be a little bit similar to the argument we just made with the Cantor set, as we're going to have a big long sequence of intervals. It also has a little bit of a similar feel to Cantor's diagonalization argument, which shouldn't be too surprising since that too was an argument for uncountability. Now, Cantor's diagonalization argument was pretty straightforward. We just said, hey, whatever the first digit is of the first number, we're going to use a different digit for our number. And then whatever the second digit is of the second number, For the number we're constructing, we're going to use a different number, and so on. We were able to construct a theoretical number that wasn't on a theoretical list of real numbers, and thus show that there's no way to count all of the real numbers. Now, this idea of getting a different digit is not quite as trivial in this context of perfect sets, but it does feel a bit similar. Now, since we're granted that the set is non-empty and perfect, we can quickly prove that it is at least infinite, which is a small step towards showing it's uncountable. So if P is perfect and non-empty, it has to be infinite. Otherwise, it would certainly consist of isolated points. If a perfect set happened to be finite, you could pick any point, let's just call it x, and you could find the closest number in the set that's greater than x, if such a point exists, and the closest point in the set that's less than x, if such a point exists, and thus have a distance epsilon from this number x, where we could say no point in the perfect set ever gets this close to x. And so x is certainly not a limit point, but that can't be, because a perfect set has to have only limit points. So a perfect set has to be infinite. Now, for contradiction, we're going to suppose that our perfect set P is countable, which means we can write it like this. Its elements are x1, x2, x3, and so on. We could list the elements in this way. Now, we will repeatedly use the fact that P contains no isolated points in order to construct a sequence of nested compact sets within P. We begin with an interval, I1, that contains the first element from P, x1. Remember, we're assuming for contradiction that P is countable, so we could certainly list its elements like this. They don't have to be in any special order, but we could just put them in an arbitrary order, and thus have this element x1. So we have this interval I1. It's a closed interval from A to B. A is less than the first number x1 in P, and B is greater than the first number x1 in P. Now, P is perfect, so we know that x1 isn't isolated, which means we could take some other number we're going to call y2 that's an element of P intersected with the open interval from A to B. So this means that y2 specifically is in the interior of this interval I1, and also it's an element of the perfect set P. Again, we know this has to exist because P doesn't contain isolated points. That means x1 can't be isolated. So no matter how much we narrow in on x1, we know that any space around x1 has to contain some other element that's in P. So we are at liberty to take an element from P within this interval that's distinct from x1. Note how we specify that y2 is not equal to x1. Now we're going to take another interval, I2, that's centered on this new number, y2. We're again specifying that I2 is a closed interval, and we're going to specify that I2 is a subset of I1, and we're going to require that x1 is not an element of this interval I2. If we wanted to be more explicit, this is one way that such a closed interval I2 could be constructed. y2 minus epsilon over 2 is the left endpoint, and y2 plus epsilon over 2 is the right endpoint, where epsilon is the minimum of these three quantities. Having this in here ensures that the left endpoint of I2 is to the right of A. Having this in here ensures that the right endpoint of I2 is to the left of B. So we're guaranteeing that I2 is contained in I1. And having this in here, the absolute value of x1 minus y2, is guaranteeing that we shrink the interval enough so that we're now excluding x1. This is just a quick picture of the situation. We had this interval I1 that contains x1, and then in that interval, we took this other point, y2, distinct from x1, and then we centered this new interval I2 on that point y2. We made this interval sufficiently small so that it's contained in I1 and so that it excludes x1. And the way we constructed this interval can be continued to construct more intervals. Since y2 isn't isolated because it's in P and P is a perfect set, we know again there exists this number y3 in P that's again in the interior of our interval I2 and where y3 is distinct from x2. Keep in mind, in the first interval, we knew that x1 was in there, and that was kind of our anchor point. We were able to guarantee that we have y2 where we want it, because x1 is in P and P can't contain isolated points. Now with x2, we have no idea where x2 is. It might be in I2, it might not be, but we are certainly at liberty to specify that y3 is not equal to x2. That's because if x2 isn't in this interval, well then of course any number from the interval isn't equal to x2. However, if x2 is in this interval, well there must be points distinct from x2 that are that close to x2, because x2 isn't allowed to be isolated since it's in P. And whether x2 is in the interval or not, we know there's some other number, y3, that's in the interval and in P, because we know that y2 is in P. And y2 is in this interval. It's in fact the center of the interval. So it can't be isolated either, so the interval has to contain some point in P other than the center, y2. And again, we can continue this construction. We let I3 be a closed interval centered on this new number y3, with x2 not an element of I3. So to get the next interval, we shrink it sufficiently so that this next number from P, x2, is guaranteed not to be in I3. It's possible that x2 was in I2, but then for I3, we're going to shrink it enough so that x2 is now excluded. And again, we're going to make sure that I3 is entirely contained in I2. By continuing this process, we get a sequence in of closed intervals satisfying these three properties. Each interval in plus 1 is entirely contained in the preceding interval in. Each number xn from that perfect set P is eventually excluded from these intervals. Specifically, each xn doesn't belong to in plus 1, and hence doesn't belong to any of the subsequent intervals either. And also, each in intersected with the perfect set P is non-empty. We know that each in is in fact centered on an element of P, excluding I1, which we just know contains x1, but isn't necessarily centered on it. Of course, each in is a closed interval, and so is compact. However, it's not necessarily the case that each in is entirely contained in the perfect set P. So we want to make sure that we intersect each in with P to get a sequence of compact sets that do all belong to P. So we're constructing the sequence Kn. Each Kn is the intersection in with P. Of course, each Kn is closed because it's an intersection of closed sets. P is perfect, so it's closed by definition, and each in is a closed interval. Additionally, each Kn is bounded because it's contained in the bounded set in. Each Kn is an intersection with a closed interval. Closed intervals are bounded, so of course each Kn is bounded. Thus, Kn is closed and bounded, so it's compact. We also know that each Kn is non-empty because of property 3, and that the Kns are nested because of property 1. Remember, Kn is an intersection of in with P, so these properties about in and in plus 1 will also hold for each Kn and Kn plus 1. So finally, we have this sequence of non-empty, compact, nested sets. So by the nested compact set property, their infinite intersection is non-empty. But of course, that's a problem, because remember, by the construction of these intervals in, we made sure that every single element of P, xn, is eventually excluded. In particular, each xn is no longer involved in these intervals once we get to in plus 1. The infinite intersection of all of the kns is also an intersection of all of the ins, and hence every single xn, every single element of P, will eventually be excluded. However, every set Kn only contains elements of P, because that's the other part of the intersection. So the nested compact set property tells us that this intersection of Kns has to be non-empty, so it has to contain an element, which means that element has to be in P. However, from the construction, we know that it can't be in P. This is a contradiction that resulted from assuming P, the perfect set, was in fact countable. So by the nested compact set property, we get that this intersection is non-empty. However, from our prior assumptions, we get that the intersection would have to be empty because it can only contain elements of P, which were excluded by the intervals in, and that of course is a contradiction. So in fact, perfect sets are indeed uncountable. uncountable. So that's what a perfect set in the real numbers is. It's a closed set that has no isolated points. And it turns out if a set has those properties, like the Cantor set or the closed intervals, those things are uncountable. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and be sure to check out my real analysis course and real analysis exercises playlists in the description for more.